biogeochemical cycle in the nature. As we all know that the flow of chemical elements and compounds between living organisms and the physical environment, basically we call it as a biogeochemical cycle. Means bio means here the living organisms. What we can say? This is living. Geo means that is the earth, soil, and the chemical cycles which are present. Means some are they are present in the gaseous form, some are they are compound form which are present in the earth crust. So wherever they are present in the environment, with the help of living organisms, means they make utilize the elements, nutrients for various purposes. So in this juncture, whatever the elements which are grabbed from the nature, it has to be go back to the nature for the imbalancing of the ecosystem. So that is how normally the flow of chemical elements and compounds between the living organisms and the physical environment, basically we call it as a biogeochemical cycle. So there are different kinds of elements which are, take an example of nitrogen is there, carbon is there, oxygen is there, water is a kind of nutrients where normally we use. All these are basically either they are of a sedimentary in object or otherwise they are gaseous in nature. So basic of the physical nature of these nutrients, basically we will see there are two kinds of pools are present in the nature. One is reservoir pool, where they are larger component, they are present, usually abiotic, and another one we call exchange pool. So exchange pool, basically both basic abiotic and biotic will be considered under this particular pool. So exchange pool and reservoir pool, these two are the components of a biogeochemical cycle. Now we will look into
Rao sir, we have received some questions.
बोलिए sir.
Just a minute. What is the role of biodiversity in the environment?
Biodiversity, because there is no role, because biodiversity is nothing but different living organisms present on this planet. So these are going to be happen because of the presence of different nature of the physical environment around us. Basically, it is that biodiversity means a vast variety of organisms which are present on this planet. It is basically because there is a difference in the physical environment. That's it. So biodiversity is a rich resource for the one of the resource which we consider it as wildlife resource.
Next. Okay, sir. There are some more questions which we had sent to you. You can take it later on.
Should the scope of environmental education in our schools be increased? So it is definitely. So we have already this kind of education modules which are already integrated at 11th, 10th as well as 12th level. So they make an impact in the children. They will develop a value towards the environment for the protection of the environment. So what are the hazardous and harmful things which we are doing towards the nature and how we should get protected. So they are definitely, mostly they are present as a component, but we need to even inculcate these values at the child level, at the root level, so that these values can be imbibed by the children and they will be in real true spirit they will implement towards the environment. That is also essential. So why is natural environment important? Because natural environment is the one which is providing all resources to the living organisms. If we don't have a natural environment, the artificial environment when you create, it has a different set of parameters where you cannot meet. So suppose you have taken creating a energy using a particular nuclear power. So when you are creating an unnatural way of creation of energy, so there will be a lot of hazardous things will be there. So when we take a green energy from the solar energy, you don't find any kind of side effects. So there won't be any complications to the nature. So that's why the nature environment is very much essential in this component. That's why. So I will take rest of the questions afterwards and we will move to the cycles. So carbon cycle is one of the important cycle. We all know that carbon is very much essential So carbon cycle is a cycle where the movement of carbon from the between the soil, water and atmosphere. So by movement of the carbon by these three, which we call as soil, lithosphere, water, hydrosphere and atmosphere. So the movement of carbon in these spheres, that is hydrosphere, lithosphere and atmosphere, we generally consider to be as carbon cycle. So we all know that the carbon is essential for the green plants. They use carbon dioxide because the carbon is available to the organisms in the form of carbon dioxide. Basically, this is in the form of organic. The plants will take carbon dioxide and they synthesize food material and they keep in the form of organic compound, which is glucose or in the form of starch. And these food material is taken by the organisms. When they eat animals, they eat the plants. This organic form of carbon will move into the tissues. From there, basically when we eat food material, that food material will burn, oxidize in the form of energy in presence of oxygen. We consider it as a respiration process. By the respiration, the oxidation of food substances will take place and they liberate carbon dioxide. Again, they go into the atmosphere. By this way, the plants synthesize carbon and some amount of carbon will be utilized by the animals for the tissues purposes. And from there, again by the respiration process, it goes back to the atmosphere. So the carbon also is in the form of bicarbonate, is utilized in the water by the some of the organisms which are present in the water. They make shells in the form of bicarbonate material. So the shells which are present in the ocean and water bodies is because of the bicarbonate, which is one of the form of carbon dioxide. And also we can see after the death of the organisms, they become fossil fuels. Means after the death of the several millions of years, these dead bodies and dead organisms which are buried in the deeper layers of the soils, they form fossil fuels from which normally we will extract petroleum products. So this is one of the source of carbon where normally which is present in the earth crust. By burning the fossil fuels, we liberate the carbon into the atmosphere. So that is how normally there are series of activities which are happening in the water, on the land and the air, which are all generally will be considered altogether as a carbon cycle. That is how normally we can. Now coming to the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is also one kind of a gaseous component. So organisms also utilize nitrogen for various purposes. So nitrogenous compounds are very, very essential for the living organisms, where they'll mark proteins and amino acids and enzymes and hormones. So that's why nitrogen is one of the important source. So that's why all organisms will use nitrogen, but they cannot directly absorb the gaseous form of nitrogen. Plants fix the nitrogen in the form of ammonia form, and this ammonia again break down into nitrate. From there, it will divide it into different components of the nitrogen, and that will be utilized by the living organism, especially the plants. From the plant, it goes back to animals. From the animals, basically it is through excretory material, excretory substances. Again, the nitrogen will go back to the nature, and that will be again subjected to various chemical changes. At last, it retains the in the original form, that is in the gaseous form. Basically, when we classify the nitrogen cycle, it takes place in following steps. That is what? First, nitrogen fixation, nitrogen assimilation, ammonification, nitrification, and denitrification. So what are these? We will see in details. So here, what we say, the fixation of molecular nitrogen in the form of ammonia by some microorganisms and plants, we call them as ammonification. We call them as ammonification. This is how ammonification occurs. So due to the dead and decaying organic matter by the decomposers, ammonia is formed. Similarly, by the nitrogen fixing bacteria with the help of plants, the ammonia is formed. Some other free nitrogen fixing bacteria also, they fix the nitrogen in the form of ammonia. This is involvement of biological organisms in the nitrogen fixation. Similarly, we have abiological activities, that is physical activities by which normally the nitrogen is also fixed by the thunderstorms, by the eruption of lava. It produces gases which normally nitrous compounds, and those will be dissolved in the rainwater. They reach to the soil. That is how normally a biological way of nitrogen fixation takes place, which is of only a 10%, but the most of the 85 to 90% of the fixation of nitrogen is through the biological nitrogen fixation. So this is how normally biological organisms are involved in transferring molecular nitrogen in the form of ammonia. From this ammonia, again, it is converted into nitrate and nitrates. It is converted into NO2 minus and NO3 minus. So it is generally conversion of ammonia into nitrates is called as nitrification, and nitrates to nitrate is also called as nitrification. Means nitrification involves two-step process: conversion of ammonia to nitrate, conversion of nitrate into nitrates. So here it is a two-step process, but we consider it as conversion of ammonia into nitrate is called as nitrification. But this nitrification involves two steps. One is conversion of ammonia into nitrate, conversion of nitrate into nitrate. So this is regulated by two bacteria. This is under the control of Nitrosomonas, and this is under the control of Nitrobacter. These are the two bacteria which involve in conversion of ammonia into nitrate, conversion of nitrate into nitrate. So after the formation of nitrate, this is utilized by most of the plants. From the plants, animal eat. That is how normally they utilize. That is what we call as assimilation of nitrogen. So usage of nitrogen by the organisms for their protoplasm and various other purposes of metabolism, we call it as a nitrogen assimilation. But some amount of nitrate which is present is again converted back into the nitrogen, which is in the form of molecular nitrogen. We call it as a denitrification process. This denitrification process is nothing but conversion of nitrate into the molecular nitrogen form. We call it as a denitrification. This denitrification is occurs because of the involvement of special bacteria called denitrifying bacteria. So this denitrifying bacteria basically helps the nitrate which is present in this form will again get back to the nature in the form of its original form. That is what we generally consider it as gaseous nitrogen form. That is what we call it as a denitrifying bacteria. So we have Pseudomonas denitrificus, similarly Clostridium denitrificus. These are some of the examples of denitrifying bacteria which are in general help for the conversion of nitrate into molecular nitrogen. This is how normally we will see the nitrogen cycle. Now coming to the next one, water cycle. So we all know that this is a very, very simple way of movement of circulation of water from the means what we say hydrosphere to means lithosphere, hydrosphere to atmosphere, atmosphere to again back to the lithosphere. From there it goes to the water bodies. In this way, the circular movement of water in these three spheres, that is, one is hydrosphere, another one is atmosphere, and third one is lithosphere, we generally consider it as a water cycle. We all know that by the process of evaporation from the water bodies, you will see the formation of clouds. The condensation of takes place. These clouds will get condensed and they precipitate in the form of rain. This rain may be in the form of a snowfall, it may be in ice fall, it may be in a different physical form, but it is a form of a water which reaches again the soil or earth. So some of the amount of water will be absorbed by the soil and goes to the deep water table, and some amount of water will be considered as runoff water which reaches to the water bodies where they are in general stored. Some amount of water is evaporated through process called as transpiration by the plant. Transpiration is nothing but the loss of water in the form of water vapor is in general considered as a transpiration. This is occurs through the aerial parts of the plant body. Similarly, some amount of water is also evaporated from the living organism's body in the form of sweat, and through the respiration process also some amount of water vapor is liberated from the respiration process in the living organisms. So all these are nothing but the vapor is developed, and this is condensed in the form of a cloud, and that cloud, when it generally cools, it generally precipitate in the form of water and rain. That rain sends the water to the again the lithosphere. From there it moves to the hydrosphere. That is how the cyclic movement of circulation of water takes place in between these things. Next, when we look into that, organisms tend to adapt to the different locations. Suppose I take an example that the organisms which are present in water are entirely different from organisms which are present above the water. Basically, in this scenario, every organism depends upon its physical environment. It looks differently. The plant which is present inside water is completely different from the plant which is present on land. Take an example, a mango is completely different tree when we look into a Neelambium, a lotus, or a hydrilla which is a. Similarly, the organisms which are present inside, that means like animals like fish, zooplankton, which are entirely different from the animals which are present on land or atmosphere, that is on air. So there is a drastic variation will be there. Physical structure of the organism according to the physical environment it is in. So it changes its body, characters, features to adapt to its existing environment. So that is how normally we say adaptation. Adaptation is a special feature that allows a plant or animal to live in a particular space or a habitat. So पानी में वो जीने के लिए अलग तरीका उसका फीचर होना चाहिए, और लैंड में जीने के लिए अलग तरीका फीचर्स होना चाहिए. जो एनिमल दोनों में यानी कि वो रह सकती है, like we can take example of a frog or tortoise or turtle. They have an adaptation to live on land as well as in water. So that is what we see. They have a special features. So why they are essential? Because successfully compete for the food, defense from the attack of the organisms, favorable conditions to reproduce more and more number of offsprings, respond efficiently to the changing environment. So these are the 4 parameters to which the organisms respond to the physical environment and develop special features, which we call them as adaptations. Basically, now we will see what are the adaptations which we very commonly see in the case of plants which are living in water. So the plants which live in water, we generally call them as hydrophytes. Basically, the main features which we see in the hydrophytes, they contain a special tissue called as aerenchyma inside the body. Means air-filled tissues are present. These are the hollow gaps which are seen in the transverse section of a stem. Nothing but aerenchyma, which provides a kind of buoyancy. Means the plant becomes very light and it flows very easily, and it can sustain the water currents, and it moves along with the water current without damaging its tissues. And when we talk about the leaves which are present inside the water, they basically have thin elongated leaves or short spaded leaves, or otherwise if the leaves which are present above the water, they will be in the flatted structure. And those leaves which are present entirely inside the plant, they don't contain any openings called stomata. The stomata are completely absent. But those which are present on the upper surface, so those plants which are float on the water, they contain stomata on only the upper surface. That is what we call epistomous condition. And they will also have a special waxy coating over it, which normally makes it translucent, and no water will be placed on it. It cannot be retained in the leaf, on the leaf. That is how normally it has been adapted. So that is how. And when we talk about the root system, you don't see any well-developed root system in the plants which are living in the water, because they're already inside the water. Their every part is able to absorb the water directly. So that's why you will see very poor root system, underdeveloped root system in the case of aquatic plants. But if they are rooted aquatic plants, they have a well-developed root system. When they are completely submerged, when they are emergent submerged, such kind of plants, basically they don't have much root system development in this. So this is how normally the plants will get adapted to the water when they grow in water. That is hydrophytic adaptations, what we can say very clearly. Similarly, living organisms also means animals also live inside the water. They are also having some adaptations. So we'll see some of the examples of aquatic adaptations in the water. So these are some of the examples. So when we observe these two examples, those who are completely living in water, they are having a streamlined body. So they have a pointed ends in the both. And basically when they have some fins for the movement or swimming inside the water, and they have a rudder like structure which is called as a caudal fin, which is bifurcated, and it is mainly meant for the changing in the direction. Basically the animals which present in the water, they develop a special web-like stool. So you can see the duck foot, to swim inside the water, it has got a special adaptation to the legs, which we call as a thin membrane which is joining all the digits. We call them as web. So these web structures are basically present inside the water feet. When we look into the flamingos, these are the birds which are near to the water bodies and inside the water. They feed on fishes. So their body is very long. They have long neck. They have long legs because they wanted to present inside the water and they wanted to deal very effectively inside the water. So they have a long structures, and also we will be able to see they are in general very smooth on the body surface. They don't have any special structures. Even though they are contained scales, scales are not horny in nature. They are very smooth. Means they reduce the friction when they swim. That is how normally we will see. And when we look into the eye is basically present at the top in the anterior portion, enough to focus the predators and the objects which are very present in front of them. And these eyes are covered by a thin translucent membrane called nictitating membrane, where normally they protect the eyes inside the water. So that is an adaptation also. So this is how normally even we see there is a fatty tissue is present inside the big fishes, which normally provides heat loss inside the water to sustain the osmoticum of the body fluid, and they act as an insulator. The blubber in the case of whale acts as an insulator, which helps them to fight the cold environment. This is how normally we can see some of the adaptations in the case of water. Now we will see the terrestrial adaptation in the case of plants. Plants which live on land we generally call as terrestrial plants. Basically, the developed root system is present. Basically, we see a well-developed root system is present. These plants we generally called as mesophytes. Means they are present in a moderately available water. That's why we call them as mesophytes. Basing on the availability of water, plants are classified into hydrophytes, mesophytes, and xerophytes. Xerophytes are the plants which grow very less availability of water or zero availability of water. But mesophytes are those which are basically present in moderately available water. They are adapted to live in a very large extent. They have a large, thin, broad leaves on the plant, and the stomata are present only lower or on both the surfaces of the root, like epistomas as well as hypostomas, which we call them as amphistomas. They have a fibrous root system or taproot system, which is a well-developed root system. And you will also see a well-developed shoot system which bears massive branching as well as the canopy, fruits, inflorescence, which are all normally makes a collective effort for the completion of these plants' life cycle. That is how normally we will see the adaptation of plants towards the terrestrial habitat. Now we will see the plants which are adapted to live in xerophytic conditions. Basically in this xerophytic condition, what we can say that they are basically of different types. First of all, they store water because the water is deficient inside the plant body. That they look like succulents. And you don't find any leaf which makes the loss of water by transpiration. the plant lose water in the form of water vapor by the process called transpiration. That's why most of the xerophytes, they don't bear leaves. So which is a disadvantage for the xerophytes. So that's why xerophytes won't be. And they are succulent because they store inside water inside their plant bodies. And they will have a well-developed root system because the root system will go into the deepest of the soil in order to pick the source of water which is present in the deep layers of the earth. So that's why they contain a well-developed root system. And also you will see on the surface of the xerophytic plants, instead of leaves, you will see some spines. So these spines or thorns, whatever they are present, instead of in the case of leaves, they protect the plant against the predators, and also they are in general helps in the regulation of temperature inside the plant. And you can see there is a special kind of stomata is visible inside the leaves of all xerophytes. If they contain leaves, they will have a special acute stomata called as sunken stomata. Sunken means deeply positioned, deeply grooved stomata. That too, they are only located below the leaf only. That is how normally the architecture of a leaf will be there. If there is at all leaf is present in the xerophytic plant, the leaf doesn't have any kind of stomata on the upper surface. They are only restricted very few number that they are present in the lower surface. That too not normal stomata, they are called sunken stomata. This is how the adaptation which we see in the case of xerophytic plants. Now we'll move to xerophytic animals. Animals also live in desert. We call them as xerophytic animals or desert animals. So basically they have also adapted to live in different sorts of xerophytic habitats. There are examples like we have camel, we have xerophytic tortoise, we have xerophytic lizard, we have which is called as a mouse, which is a desert mouse. So all these are the examples of animals which are living in desert condition. Basically how they are able to cope up dry conditions, high temperature, very less amount of water availability, and how they are able to prevent the loss of water from their body. These are the things which are adapted, which we very clearly observe in the case of most of the animals which are present in the desert condition. Basically you can see they are able to expose to the high temperature. Basically these animals need to regulate their body temperature in order to prevent the loss of water. That is how normally we can see the camel can drink a large amounts of water when the water is available for the survival of many days, and also they can excrete very little amount of water or otherwise zero amount of water in the excretory material. And even often we can say this kangaroo rat mouse which we see, it almost excrete the crystals of urine and uric acid in the case of birds where there is zero amount of water. That is how normally the water will be minimized, the loss of the water will be minimized in the case of most of the animal in order to withstand the retention of water in the body tissues as well as other organs from which none. So camel have a hump to store the water. Basically the oxidation of water also will liberate some amount of biological water. So these animals, they also produce biochemical water, the water which is in general generated in the body by chemical reactions inside the body. That water is also utilized for various other purposes. This is how normally we see. And basically you will see the organisms are having some horns and rough skinny structure like architecture, which makes these things to prevent the loss of water by the body surface. So they minimize the loss of water through the body surface also, basically to prevent loss of water. So desert animals like reptiles have minimized a lot of water by excreting urine in the form of insoluble uric acid. This executes, basically ensures very little waste of water. That is how we will see different animals like kangaroo rat, lizards, tortoises, as well as camel. They are adapted in such a way that they will minimize the loss of water by just making different form of their excretory material into a next range where it also doesn't contain even water at some extent also. That is how normally we see. But animals basically in cold conditions basically also have some kind of adaptations. So like the animals which are penguins, seal, and bears and tigers which are in polar areas, all these are also basically will have an adaptations. So their relative body loss of heat will be minimized with the surface area. That is the first adapt. So the animals which are in the place of polar regions will be having more means larger surfaces, means more, the size is very large because to minimize the surface loss of heat with surface and body ratios. That is the ratio which normally minimizes the heat loss. And also they will have a thick fur as well as a special kind of a starch, or otherwise not starch, fat is deposited inside the below the skin. Subcutaneous fat is present, which acts as a insulator, which minimizes the heat loss also. That is how normally we will see. In case of penguins, so penguins have thick layered, densely packed feathers to reduce heat loss. Its flippers and legs are basically adapted to such conditions, what we can see. And also we will see some of the animals which are adapted to in aerial conditions. In this aerial conditions, we have seen the body is also streamlined, the weight of the bone is very less, and the organs are reduced. If they are present, bones are present. The bones contains hollow, air-spaced bones, which we call pneumatic bones, which we give. And the forelimbs of these animals are modified in the form of wings, which gives flight nature. So such kind of adaptations are basically very, very essential when they are in living conditions. And basically they are called, considered as aerial adaptations called arboreal adaptations. So these are the birds and flying squirrel, like what we can see, luma, and we have bat, and all these are some standard examples which are adapted to this. So birds, the wings are basically modification of forelimbs. They are meant for the flight. So bones are, especially pneumatic bones are present, and they have a strong flight muscles which normally present, and they have even a strong eyesight to observe the prey from the aerial parts and to catch that prey also. These are some of the adaptations of the animals which are adapted to in living condition, which are the aerial side. So when we move to the area to population interactions, when there is a population, there will be an interaction among the organisms. Organisms not only interact with the physical environment, there is an interaction among the organisms also. So that kind of one of the organism, we consider it as a mutualism. When there is two individuals are get interacted to each other and both are benefited. When both are benefited, that we generally consider it as a mutualism. The good example of mutualism is lichens. In this, lichen is nothing but association of an algae and fungi. Here the algae will provide food material to the fungi, and the fungi will provide minerals and nutrients and water to the algae. By this way, both are get each other help and they are benefited. That is called mutualism. Now we are to the commensalism. The means interaction between a sea anemone and a hermit crab. This is called sea anemone. This is a coelenterates, and this is a hermit crab, which is a crustacean. These both are animals, but there is an interrelationship between the sea anemone and crab. Sea anemone is basically it cannot move; it sticks to the rocks. But accidentally, if it is formed over the crab, when the crab moves, the sea anemone moves. It gets the food material very easily. And simultaneously, you will also see that the crab is also get protected with the kindness. In this way, basically, this is in general we consider it as a commensalism, where the interaction where species benefit and other is unaffected. So here there is no much helpful nature to the sea anemone, but basically it protecting the crab from the predators. This is where the association, one is benefited, one is neither harmed nor benefited. We call it as a commensalism. Now when we look into the parasitism, we all know that there is a host and parasite relation. The parasite includes one organism inside another organism. Basically, it drives the food material as well as shelter from the host. On behalf of this parasite will give disease to the host. In this association, what happens? The parasite is benefited and the host is harmed. Means one negative and one positive interaction will be there when is a parasitism. So that's why in this relationship, parasite always benefits and the host always face the harmful consequences from the parasite. That association we generally call it as a parasitism. Now we will go to the next one called symbiosis. So symbiosis is also a kind of one-to-one interaction where two organisms are independent on others, dependent on others. Take an example, the plant depends on insects for the sake of pollination. The insects will depend on plants for the sake of pollen and nectar. So in this way also, you will see quite interaction. Both are in general, we consider to be there a symbiosis. So you can say symbiosis and the mutualism are basically we consider it as a similar thing, but symbiosis means we consider interrelations of any two organisms, whether it is irrespective of negative, positive, negative, negative, positive, positive, we generally consider it as symbiosis as such, which is written in your module. But symbiosis is also one way we say that it is association between two organisms where two are get benefited of each other. Now we will move to the population and growth. We all know that a group of species which are occupying in a piece of geographical area, we generally consider it as a population. So population basically it grows. The growth of the population is mainly depend upon density, natality, mortality, population dispersal, age distribution of the organisms according to the environmental factors. So when we look into the population, basically natality is the number of births per thousand within a unit time. That is what natality is, nothing but it is a birth rate. Number of births took place per thousand at a unit period of time, we generally consider it as a natality. Now coming to the next one, it is death rate. That is what we call mortality. The number of individuals dying per thousand per unit area, we call it as a mortality. And another one we call it as emigration, outward movement of organism from a given population. यानी कि एक population से कुछ लोग बाहर चले गए. That why we consider emigration. We say the population growth also depends upon the how many people are moved out of the population, and the population size is also depend how many people are come to the population. That is what called as immigration, inward movement of organisms from outside into the given population is generally we call it as a immigration. Means we have birth rate, we have death rate, we have emigration, and we have immigration. All these four will have an impact on the population growth. When we look into the growth curves, there are two types of growth curves are present basically. One is called as S-shaped curve. Another one is in general we consider it as a J-shaped curve. So this is what you are able to see, it is a S-shaped curve. And what we are able to see now is a J-shaped. In this, so both are in general, the S-shaped curve basically which occurs in the nature, which is more of practical. This is only concept of hypothetical, this is logical, this is mathematical. Means, I will just explain this. When the resources are unlimited in the population, when the resources available to the population are unlimited, always there is a growth. So this growth is in J shape, that's why it is called J-shaped curve. Means the population size continuously increases when the resources present in the area are very high. They are unlimited resources, they utilize it by the organisms and they go continuously, exponentially. There is a continuous growth. There is no limitation for the growth. But this doesn't take place in the nature because there is a limitation of resources to the individuals or populations which are existing in the nature. There is always a restriction because of the competition between the population for the same resources. So there is a close association, means more interaction we see or competition we see in the similar species, and the competition will be less in different types of species. So similarly, when we will go to the logistic growth, this is how normally the real terms of population growth will be there. So when the resources are money, there will be an increase in the growth. After that, when the resources are limited, the growth will have a a lag and a flattening of curve will be there. This is lag phase, this is log phase, and this is exponential growth phase. So they have 3 points will be there. That is initiation of growth, there will be a exponential growth, but when it reaches, when the limitation will be there for the resources, then the curve will be flattened. Now we can say the growth of coronavirus in the world is like this. When there is a weakening of the virus, then you will be able to see the flattening of the curve. This is how normally we are able to see the growths in the case of nature. So this is normally the different types of growth what we are able to see in the case of nature. So I have got a question, that is, parasites are autotrophic or heterotrophic in nature, they said. So I have already told in the previous section that autotroph is the one which depends, means it depends on its own for the sake of food material. Means autotroph synthesize its own food material based on the inorganic substances available in the nature. Heterotrophs are those organisms which depend on other organisms for the sake of food material because they cannot synthesize their own food material. So parasites are considered to be the one kind of heterotroph. Parasitism is also a kind of heterotroph. Means under the heterotroph we can say herbivorous animals, holozoic nature, and in the case of parasitism association. So parasites are basically depend on other living organisms for the sake of food as well as shelter. So that's why parasite organisms will comes under heterotrophic nutrition only. Changes in the environment degrading from the mining. So mining has got a several effect in case of health hazards as well as for the community disturbances. Basically mining, majorly it hits the living organisms. It produces a particulated matter. This is what we generally say. Particulated pollution is basically a main subtract from the mining industry. So this, when the people who absorb these particles through respiratory system, they accumulate in the lungs and they cause a occupational diseases generally called as emphysema. So the alveoli loses the elasticity, due to which normally the ability of the individual to retain the intake of high amount of air will be decreased drastically, due to which normally the breathlessness will be there. Acute emphysema leads to the respiratory infection also. This is how we will see. So what is the role of human being in the environment? That is another question was asked. Actually, the human being is the only the animal which is causing harm to the nature. So we are in general exploring our ecosystem beyond our necessity, and we are over exploiting the resources of the nature, and that's why everywhere we are able to see sustainable development, sustainable agriculture, sustainable ecosystem. These words are coming, that we used to use resources to a maximum extent, and also we keep these resources to the next future generation also. That is how we consider it as a sustainable natural resources usage. Man is one of the biggest threat to the environment as well as nature. Due to the various activities of the man, lot of disturbances, like we say deforestation, pollution of water bodies, as well as pollution of atmosphere, all of these are degrading the biodiversity in the nature, which leads to the climatic change and what we are facing. The new types of viruses, new types of living organisms are generating new types of organisms which are in general are unpalatable and unsituations, and high increasing of the temperature, all these because of the changes in the nature, because of the human activities only. And one more question I wanted to attend, last question. What are basic components of natural environment? As I have already mentioned, the basic components of natural environments are in general two components. That is, one we consider abiotic component, the other one we call it as a biotic component. Under the abiotic component, we can say that they are of sunlight, temperature, rain, but is precipitation, water, soil and air are, these six are considered to be the abiotic components. Under the biotic component, we say primary producers, that are the plants, herbivorous which eat on plants, carnivorous, omnivorous, and detrivorous. So all these are considered to be the components of biotic environment in the natural environment. Omnivorous are those organisms which eat on everything, means the food which they eat a plant as well as animal. We consider it as a omnivorous. Man is considered as a omnivorous. Cockroach is considered as a omnivorous. So detrivorous are the organisms which feed on dung and decaying organic soil matter, which we called as detrivorous. Example, some bacteria, dung bugs, as well as detrivorous animals like earthworm, they are considered to be the good example of detrivorous organisms. So this is end of my session. Thank you for being patient. I hope you are understanding. Everything you have understood. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.